Good morning. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. This is your morning minute meditation for this morning. Let's take our Bibles and go back to 1 Peter chapter 4. And a week or so or a day or two ago, we started out of 1 Peter chapter 4. And we started a few thoughts that we have been giving you out of this passage. And we looked at verse 1 and 2. And I want to look at verse 3 and 4 this morning, 1 Peter chapter number 4. And we'll look at verse number 3, verse number 4. For the time past of our life, it sufficed us to have the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lasciviousness, lust, excess of wine, revilings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries. Verse number 4, wherein they think it strange that you run not with them to the same excess of variety, speaking evil of you. We have been looking at how the believer is to live in light of the last days. In verse 1 and 2, the believer is to live victoriously. When you come to verses 3 and 4, we find that Peter gives us another aspect of the believer's life in the light of the last days. It is in our text, verse 3 and 4, to live spiritually. The child of God is not to live a life of worldliness, fleshliness, carnality, devilishness. And so we are to live a very spiritual life. The Christian life should be a spirit-filled life. According to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18, be not drunk with wine where it is excess, but be ye filled with the Spirit. And so we find that a spirit-filled life is a spirit-controlled life. And so in our text, Peter is contrasting or comparing the life that we used to live to the life that we now are supposed to live. And in verses 1 and 2, he deals with the will of God. Verses 3 and 4, he deals with the will of the Gentiles. We find him comparing that, the will of the Gentiles. Gentiles, anyone who was not saved. And so we find that the will is a determination, a desire. So we're not to live our life with the determination of a sinner or the desire of a sinner. We're not to be satisfied with a sinful life. In verse 3, he deals with the walk of the Gentiles. He begins to give us a list of some sins in the text that we are not supposed to live as concerning the child of God. Lasciviousness, lust, excess of wine, revilings, banqueting, and abominable idolatries. And in verse 4, we find the war of the Gentiles. In verse number 4, when they think it strange that you run no more with them to the same excess of riot and speaking evil of you. In other words, the war is this. They don't understand why we live a victorious Christian life. They don't understand why we live a very spiritual life. And so when they see us not participate in the same sins that they're participating in, but we live to a higher standard and we're living spiritual and controlled by the Spirit of God, the Bible said they begin to speak evil of you. They begin to mock you. They begin to blaspheme you. They begin to slander you and ridicule you and mock you because you don't participate in the same sins that they participate in. So Peter is dealing with the believer living in light of the last days, living it very spiritually. Think on these things.